Okay, so we are live at this point, and we'll wait for a couple of minutes maybe before we start. Is that fine? Just allow people to join in. उधर हुआ है start. Okay. Okay, so good morning, all of you. Welcome back to this second Mindful Saturdays session. Uh, First of all, a big thank you to all the friends and colleagues who joined in on our first session and took part so actively. For those of you who weren't able to uh, log in live for the first session, we thank you for having taken the time out. It was a very long session, 100 minutes actually, to go through the recording and share back your views with us. We are extremely encouraged by these responses. In fact, I think on the whole, most of our friends and colleagues who have logged into Mindful Saturdays have mentioned to us that the topics, the conversations were something that they could very closely associate with in terms of personal experience, in terms of the questions that they have about, you know, these matters that concern all of us. So, encouraged by all those responses, we decided to do a few more sessions and run this as a bit of a series. And here we are with the second session. So, let me welcome my friends on the panel again, Ananya, Harini, and Indira. Thank you for taking the time out, and thank you for also being very patient in terms of all the calls and discussions we have had preparing ahead for this session. Just in case, for our friends and colleagues who don't know about Ananya, Indira, and Harini, a few words about each one of them before we begin. So, Ananya works with the United Nations Children's Fund. She's based in Assam. She works as a social policy specialist for UNICEF. She has been a mindfulness practitioner for a very long time, and she has many insights that she will continue to share with us. Harini works with an organization called as the Center for Learning Resources based in Pune, and she's mostly into the domain of early childhood education, and she's a nationally known resource person. She's also associated with the Just Being Center in Pune, and she is a mindfulness practitioner too. Indira is our third friend, our panelist, who is an advocate and mediator with long years of experience of fighting for the dispossessed, the disadvantaged people. And she is deeply into yoga, mindfulness practice, and meditation. And of course, I'm Sheshagiri. I'm based right now in Raipur, and the Adda is a space that has been created for these kind of conversations. Okay, so once again, welcome all of you. And so let me begin, with this very broad question today. Uh, and this second session of ours is going to focus on something that is very very intimate to all of us, and something which we all experience both within and from outside. And this is the emotion of anger. uh, it is so important and fundamental to our life. We thought that we should talk a little about it and see what mindfulness practice has to say. So, my question then to begin with to all of you is, what has anger meant to me, right? How do you see it? How have you struggled with this emotion? I mean, I'm using the word struggle very deliberately here because it is not a walkover, it's not something that is very easy to deal with. So, each one of us struggles. And the other associated question is, in your practice as of practices of mindfulness, and as mindfulness practitioners, how have you looked at this, and how has this approach of mindfulness influenced your life and your way of looking at anger. Uh, Before I let this open, one thing that strikes me as very, very obvious about anger is, can we even look at it? I mean, today we are talking about looking at it. It is so easy to get swept away in that emotion, and and it's also, there's also a justificatory kind of sense to it. Oh, I was angry and I had to let it out. So probably what we're going to be discussing today is a little counterintuitive. I think it's not going to be so easily and readily obvious. But then that's the reason why the three of you are here, to take us through what it means in terms of your practice of mindfulness, right? So can I throw that question to Indira to begin with? And welcome, Indira, again.
Uh, yeah, thank you, Giri, and thanks Ananya and Harini for being part of this. I enjoyed last time's session, and thank you, dear participants, whoever's taken out the time to be here with us today. Uh, I just want to qualify something before I continue. You mentioned that I've been fighting for very long. You're absolutely right. I used to fight. And today, I hope that I have traveled from that fighting mode to really working with the issue in question to try to make a small difference. So I just thought I'll make that little clarification.
Hmm.
Uh, so you asked questions about anger. Uh, so let me start with what anger has meant to me. In the past, it's meant, and before I say that, I've been sitting with this for a few days now and trying to reflect because while we practice, we take a lot of things for granted as well, though we've traveled and really worked hard uh, to I won't even say overcome these emotions, but to work with them. But still, a lot of things settle down, so you tend to also forget because that's the way we are. So I did try to sit down, and I'll try my best to share whatever I remember.
Hmm.
Some of it will also come up organically. So one of the things that anger has meant to be in the past is it's been associated with a sense of deep hurt. So when someone very close to me, when I felt that they were not understanding me or my needs, it would fill me with some kind of a rage. And as you said, it seemed very justifiable because I would feel that, oh, they've known me for so long, they should have known me. And how can they do something that wounds me so much? So much so that I felt that they definitely do know, and I would never share my thoughts and my anger and the reasons, and it would fester and grow and grow. So I don't know whether many of us have also, undergone this, but this is something that I thought I would share. Uh, the other would be, and they are all similar finally, I found. The other would be a sense of rage at what I felt was an act of injustice. Now, here it might not necessarily be associated with me, but I would feel it was something that was very unfair to someone who was vulnerable. In a way, it's helped me to do my work, but today, thankfully, I've looked at it from a slightly different lens. But yes, I would feel, if someone, say, neglected someone within the family, so there was a sense of non inclusiveness. Or, and similarly, for the poor. So, how can you do these things? So, if it is the state or if it is someone else, and I felt it was someone doing something to someone, it was very unjustified, and I would feel the sense of rage.
Hmm.
And so that was another one. And there was also sometimes it would be fueled by a sense of deep irritation. So a feeling of being taken for granted. Uh, I would feel there was an encroachment on my time, and the person in question didn't even understand that I was doing something important or it was work or whatever it was, and they would keep calling. And I can give a short example, very brief. But here, my mom used to keep calling me during work, and I used to really get angry, irritated actually, because she would say, "Fix this, fix that," and she was already quite elderly. But once I was sharing this with the husband of a friend of mine, whose mother has been just withdrawn for the last 20 years and she doesn't do much. She takes no interest in life. So he said, "My God, you're upset. I would be so happy if my mother called me to fix the Tata Sky. She just does nothing and she's just sitting there." So there was a sense of gratitude that slowly replaced that irritation. So, anyway, that was another one, this constant irritation. So today I don't feel that way, thankfully. It's been a lot of practice though. And also when things would be out of my control, what I felt were out of my control. So if it was an outside thing that is happening, like there could be a lot of traffic and I'm stuck in it, or something that's happened. Let's say there is a sudden listing of a matter in court, which always happens, by the way, but I would always get irritated because I'd say, "Oh, why can't things be planned in advance?" So this is just a bit of a range, and I thought I would share that. Uh, my response would typically be either I would shout, and and I think now when I look back, I feel it was probably because I felt I was not being heard, so I would keep raising my voice. When I was a child and my brother was a past master of bullying us, he would keep calling me and making me stand here and there. And older brothers, they're very good at bullying. So I would actually rise on my toes in frustration, and they would all enjoy it. My family members, they'd say, "There she goes, rising on her toes in annoyance." So this was one of the responses, my expressions of anger. And the other was I would withdraw and just be shut. So I would not talk, sulk. This was in more recent times, in the sense the last 10, 15 years. Uh, so, that was what anger had meant to me. I would struggle a lot because I would feel very exhausted very often.
Hmm.
So it was not comfortable and also very tight. When you're not talking to someone, and there would be a pall of gloom, there would be a tightness in the atmosphere. So these are some of the sensations I felt. And of course, I hoped that the other person or people felt it, because I thought that that way they would understand me. But actually, that was not the case. They would withdraw and they would probably be huddled in a fright because they say, "There she goes again." So, and I would get even angrier. So, anyway, so that was something that would, you know, that was the way I would manifest my anger. And so the shutdown didn't help, because I found that I was actually repeating the story in a way in my mind and making it many-fold. So, and very often the other person whoever had done this had said something that sparked this fuse or whatever, would probably have done it out of innocence, or even if they did it to uh, to what I felt was to hurt me, but actually not. They were expressing themselves. So I slowly realized that by stepping back and looking at what was happening. But mainly, I would feel uncomfortable, and I also felt that it wasn't helping me or my relationships with many people. So, luckily, many of the people whom I would feel angry with were very close to me, and they still are very close to me. But there were some relationships, a couple of them, where I really withdrew, and it was difficult to repair them. So I really thought that I must look into this and see whether I must take greater responsibility for this rather than put it all on someone else. So I started looking into this anger and also these other feelings of being rejected and all of that. And
Hmm.
somewhere in the back of my mind, I also did know that I was not being rejected, because these people would reach out, to say, "Oh, what is the problem?" And I would say, "As if you don't understand," in my mind. I wouldn't even articulate it. So I realized that it was a lot of it was in my own mind. And in the mid 90s, there was an episode when I was really very angry and I blew a fuse. So that's when I started this journey on meditating and trying to figure out whether there was something I could do to calm myself. Because in meditation, very often they say that these are methods to calm your mind.
Hmm.
So then began this journey. And of course, on the last date, I have shared how I've wandered into this. I mean, consciously, semi consciously, consciously, and also now more concertedly. As far as my experience with working with anger, some of the practices today are really to pause and to realize that that anger is not me. There is something
Mhm.
that is rising in me. There is a feeling, and sometimes if there is something that is distracting enough, it does pass. Just like good times pass, even anger does pass. So I realized that, and I realized that if you look back, but just look back, and it's part of the practice. We're also trained, luckily, in it. But to really look, just sit with it, look into it, and see what the roots are, what the causes are, then you can see that very often it's also because you're not paying attention to yourself. And therefore, you can actually address it by paying attention to yourself and articulating your feeling or your needs, but not necessarily in a fit of anger, because then that drives the other person away, and I think it's quite counterproductive. Of course, I'm saying this today from a position where I've worked very hard, and I will, as I said, the work started from the mid 90s, so it's been quite a long journey, and more concertedly in the last 5 years, I would say, and even more so in the last 3 years, and then of course every day. So that's how it's been. How it's helped me is that, so today, very often, luckily, I don't feel anger. It's sometimes there is I watch that, I'm feeling a sense of disturbance, for instance. And I've also learned that there is a fine line between suppression and also dealing with it, because
Mhm.
suppression is not that healthy, because you think you're not angry, but actually it's sitting there and it's waiting to nicely boomerang on you. So I've also learned to sort of listen to my anger or to my feelings in a better way, to understand what they are, to see how I can address them. And I can give a little example again, and then I'll hand over to my friends. Recently, and this is not such a big event because I was not very angry, but still I was uncomfortable. So we have these hearings, and in the last 2 weeks, we suddenly had a listing of a hearing. And the judge in question, she is very bright, very, very action oriented, unlike most judges, but is very sharp and is a very poor listener, and does not allow a single person to complete the sentence and goes on hammer and tongs, hammer and tongs. So, so that's the other thing. I used to also get angry earlier if I was interrupted, because I really feel that I am a mindful listener. So I also like to be heard completely. Uh, but before me, there were many others, and I could see how she was sort of demolishing them. She was not listening to anything. They would say three words, and she would attack without even hearing the full thing. I felt it was rather unjustified. But now, with the training, I did not feel angry, but I could sense that there was discomfort rising in my body. I could feel that my legs were getting slowly tighter. And then I calmed myself down so that by the time my turn came, I just did not respond. So when she was going blabber, 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 I could just let her blabber and not react. Earlier, I would have said, no, but this is what I'm trying to say. Will you hear me? Blah, blah, blah. But that did not happen. I did try to listen. I tried to respond. Of course, she did blabber. But nonetheless, we did it in a reasonably calm way, and we got whatever we wanted.
Wow.
So,
Amazing.
and yeah, and on another date also, I could, the judge kept saying, nowadays the judges are on paid holiday. Even the government people have to go to work, but judges are merely, listing cases, and then they're taking trenches of them, and just en masse they're adjourning them by three months, saying, oh, we
My
can't
God.
hear it on
Okay.
video conferencing. So I tried
Mhm.
to convince this judge that the matter was important. The other side was jumping up and down saying it cannot be heard on video. So I said, okay, just give me 2 minutes to convince you that it is possible, but if you feel otherwise. So I try to give them the freedom of that decision. So if you feel otherwise, of course, you're welcome to say that you cannot hear it. But if you feel that you can, then of course, please decide this way. So rather than saying, no, no, it can, and obviously the other side would want an adjournment. Earlier I would have made these very intellectual points which are very obvious and say, isn't it obvious to you? But then they would back off. So it's just that you're not putting that person at discomfort or unease, and you're
Right.
trying to articulate yourself better. I watched the emotion rise, pause, step back, and try to come back a little later. And sitting and letting it just settle down helps me a lot. So I just thought I will share this. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful, Indira. In fact, uh, I mean, you've said so many things, but some of the things that strike me, even from the last session, is this whole aspect of pausing. And I think, in fact, today we have said pause and say hello to anger. And every example that you've given here illustrates how you have tried to do that. Um uh, and the pause perhaps also creates, like you yourself said the last time, it creates a certain space between one event and the other. And I think that space is very important because it helps us to probably step back and avert disaster and more turmoil and more violence and so on. uh, I found very interesting this aspect of the body connect. I mean, as you struggle with anger, there's something that is happening inside the body, and we did talk about it the last time also. It's not just a mental thing that happens in the brain, but then the entire body is also affected by it. uh, so I would want us to continue this conversation with what Harini has to say on this. How do you look at anger? What are your struggles been, and how has mindfulness practice helped you to see this? And of course, from what Indira says, it's a long shot. It's no shortcuts over here. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you, Indira, for such a such an open um, sharing. Anger is a difficult um, thing to process. Um, yeah, I've had this really long relationship with anger, both um, first in terms of someone who's gone through a journey of being at the receiving end and not having devices to protect myself, uh, and then uh, having been at a stage where protecting became so important that I've been through a phase of feeling really violently angry at the drop of a slightest violation. Uh, my best response to anger is crying, really. Uh, the second best is to shout. uh, uh, but yeah, I think the most spontaneous thing that happens to me is because I know that I can't shout and I don't want to shout. Um, I really break into tears and really, really bitter, angry tears. My whole body is crying if I'm angry. Like I can feel the surge of some kind of a you know tight pull pouring out. So, uh, um, but I think in terms of what anger means to me, over the years as I've been with this practice, I think for me, anger is a signal that something in me is feeling threatened, injured,
Hmm.
and a part of me is really trying to protect it. And anger may not be the best way of finding protection, but the reality is that anger, as Indira also very well put it, she gave such beautiful examples of her personal life. It's a response to a certain feeling of threat and injury. And I think
Hmm.
when we look at anger like that, whether in ourselves or someone else, there is a certain, at least for me, I begin to see anger as having a noble intent. The manifestation may not be correct or may not be useful, desirable, but really, what is the purpose behind this anger? And if we look at most of our experiences with anger, it's a reaction that arises in us because we are deeply injured. We feel deeply threatened or injured or hurt. Um,
Hmm.
so, in my experience, um, whenever I have taken time to pause with this angry feeling, to really let the rush of that emotion pass, whether it is a mild or a very intense rush, and depending on that, it could take like half a minute or 3 hours. Um, and I've looked at what's really going on for me. What's the purpose behind this reaction? What is really needed here? I've come in touch with some part of me that is feeling really hurt, and that needs care. Um, and then I have taken time to listen to that.
Hmm.
So it's really like talking to a friend for me. Or sometimes, like I'm right now in Himachal and there's a beautiful mountain here. And uh, I love
We envy you for
going
that.
in. And right now it's snow clad. And I was just upset about something the other day. And I just sat next to the mountain and it felt like I could really listen to myself fully just by the whole presence of that mountain. There was something very stabilizing about it. And nature does that. We all know that. Um, and I was angry, and I let the anger move through me, wash over. I just sat there and just let it all come. Uh, I was ranting and I was crying and I was all of that. And then at the end of that, there was this really vulnerable feeling of how alone I felt in that moment and how threatened I felt and how much I just wanted someone to see that I was really distressed. So the anger had moved, and what had arisen was a part of me that was feeling very distressed, very threatened, very humiliated by something. And I sat with that. And then there was a lot of crying, but the crying was not out of anger, but the crying was out of just this sense of pain, this sense of feeling really lonely in that moment. And it was like the mountain was listening to me. But really, what was happening was that I was just witnessing what was going on for me right through that whole moment of starting with anger to really feeling um, pained and coming in touch with a part of me that was feeling exiled. So really, I think for me, the befriending of anger has always taken me to a part of me that has felt exiled. It has felt exiled either in a relationship or it has felt exiled within me. And mostly it's really the within me. There are so many parts of us that we've left unmet over the years because that's what the world and living demands. Um, and when we meet this exile with a compassionate, witnessing presence, and that's really what mindfulness has taught me, the bottom line is to be able to witness. That's what the pause does. And,
Wow.
and
Compassionate
as you,
witnessing.
yeah, as the practice deepens, like Indira says, you can witness in that moment, as it arises. It doesn't always have to be the storm, but that day it was for me. Um, but as I went through that whole storm and then the meeting of this vulnerable, exiled place, um, I felt it all settled down eventually. And then suddenly
Hmm.
I could see the whole other side that was going on. Like, okay, this person is angry with me. If this was what was going on inside me, what is really she in need of? She's in need of the same thing. And I didn't have to ask this question intellectually, but because I had been able to feel uh, in intimately in touch with what was behind this anger for me, I could naturally be in touch with what was behind this anger for this other person.
Yeah.
It was
Mhm.
it's almost like in that moment, the spacious witnessing is not just of yourself, but also if there's another person involved
Person.
of the other
Yeah.
side. Um, so yeah, that's what it is for me. It's really first of all learning to honor the fact that even anger, which is so violent, has ultimately an intention which is noble enough. It's trying to protect you from something. It may not have the right means,
Hmm.
and the reason for that is there are a number of ways in which we can um, explore that. Why do we develop such um, means of violence? Um, but that's a different question. But really, I think I've said my bit that it's the beginning of learning to listen to anger. Why are you here? What's going on for you? And then allowing
Hmm.
the whole story to come out. And that involves staying with all of yourself, the whole experience, which is very uncomfortable, distress in a physical way, in a feeling way, in a thinking way. There is just such a storm of uncomfortable sensations and thoughts and feelings, and the whole waterfall. Really, it's like a um, watershed moment. But then there is, I think, the other side. Um, so yeah, I think that's what anger means to me, and that's how mindfulness has taught me to honor it for what it is, without letting it
Hmm.
really go and do its bit, or without me wanting to run away, or without me trying to judge myself for it, but really listening,
Hmm.
witnessing. What's it here for? Yeah, that's
Right.
it.
Wonderful. Wonderful. I mean, uh, I I think this part that you talked about, there is some part of me that is hurt and which needs care. Also, probably takes us to this question of being compassionate with ourselves, and that's something that we can explore further. At this point of time, before I bring in Ananya, a number of comments that our friends have been making is Smita Bharati, of course, uses this term expanse of empathy, and I think that's very beautifully put as she was hearing you speak. And a number of questions that have come from Jitendra, Priyanka, Dharmender, and uh, a few others, which I will be taking up. In fact, and just to kind of give you a sense of what these thoughts are from our friends and colleagues, so that we are part of a larger conversation here. Jitendra says that the human tendency is to respond, but then here we are talking about diverting ourselves from the existing thoughts. I mean, probably when he says divert yourself, he means step aside. And how far is this justifiable in the current professional world when we are chasing targets and when there is so much pressure? So that's a very contextual question which all of us can relate with, people who are dealing in high pressure situations. uh, Dharmendra talks about a perspective of paradox. If we are not assertive enough but are very helpful, for example, then we are likely to end up self sacrificing. So how does one look at that? I mean, don't blow the lid, but then be empathetic, compassionate, but at the same time, you might end up feeling that you're sacrificing a lot more than you should. And Priyanka's, of course, talked about, she's talked more about taking care of yourself. What does it mean? Uh, does this mean that you're watching your thoughts, analyzing what you want? So some of these, questions linger in the background as we move ahead. And also Prachi, who has just now joined, talks about uh, uh, the importance of conveying what you feel in a mature way, which I think is, of course, a very difficult thing to do, but it's important that we have those difficult conversations. So these are some of the responses that we're getting to this really evocative and very, uh, you know, uh, I think very touching kind of sharing that both you and Indira have done. So let me now invite Ananya with those questions. What has anger meant to me? How have I struggled with it? And how has an approach of mindfulness to anger influenced my life and me? Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
I'll just take a very common example, say, of a mother in law and a daughter in law. In that relationship, one would see affection, but one would also have these episodes of anger. And often I have felt that possibly mothers in law, they cannot see a situation very neutrally. But but the way I have responded to is very different. I might have felt anger at that point in time, but within seconds that would shift because immediately there would be a sense of empathy for the other person, for this woman. And I would see, and I could so clearly see that she has also been suffering because of these various dimensions of patriarchy, of which she is a part too. Possibly her life is also being dominated, or even if I don't use the word domination, might have been influenced a lot by her father, by or other male figures when she was growing up, by her husband, and now by her sons. And it
Hmm.
shifted the anger in me to a huge sense of empathy. But when it has come to men, and when I say men, I mean the men in my lives, whether these are close relationships, friends, family, co workers, different kinds, we interact differently, right? My predominant narrative when things did not go well was, how could you do this to me when I care for you so much? How could you take me for granted? How could you trample on my dignity and my self respect? How could you belittle my thoughts, my emotions, my feelings? And and this has really caused me a lot of distress for years. I realized that this kind of a narrative that I have is possibly for two reasons. One is that as I was growing up as a young child, I have been extremely valued by my family, by my mother and my father. I have
Hmm.
felt very valued as a child and very valued as a girl. So my parents' predominant, suggestion or parenting thing would be that grow up to be women of substance. Don't be a mental piece or a decorating piece in someone's drawing room. Face your own struggles and come out of it. So there was a deep sense of value as a human being that they gave me, and the ecosystem that I grew up also valued me a lot as a person, as a human being, and as a woman. And I have seen that when I felt that I was not being valued in a similar way or in sync with what I thought I should be valued by men in my life, it really hurt me a lot. And I really felt distressed. I felt a lot of deep grief and sadness and a lot of anger out of it. And this was also kind of, you know, supplemented by the notion that I have had, that men over generations have enjoyed certain privileges. And because of those privileges, they take a lot of things for granted. And they have a particular way of relating because they also have their upbringing, right? They're growing up in a cultural context, they have their own ecosystem. And in general, they are valued a lot in the society. So all of these things, this view that I have developed over time, kind of caused a lot of suffering in me, a lot of anger in me, a lot of sadness in me. And every relationship that I have had, there has been a tipping point where I realized that I cannot let it continue like this anymore, because I could see what it was doing to my body. uh, when you have these episodes of anger or hurt, I would really, my body would respond in a particular way. And because I have been into this practice of mindfulness now for quite some time, I can really understand what's happening in my body, you know.
Hmm.
I would, I can feel the tightness in my head, much more sensations in my feet, and so on and so forth. So in every relationship that I have interacted, particularly I'm talking about the relationships with men,
Mhm.
I realized that I do not want to be controlled by that emotion. I would rather be in the driver's seat, and I would rather look at how I can take care of that emotion. So it is not about suppressing, but to look at it and to see how I can really take care of that emotion. And in this, of course, my mindfulness practice has helped because it helped me to pause. And as I paused, I kind of came across, if I may use, three dimensions. The first one was I realized actually I'm very angry with myself. And that anger was actually getting reflected on the other person. I was
Mhm.
blaming myself, I was shaming myself for certain choices I have made, for certain decisions I have taken in my life. And kind of, being so hard to myself, saying that how can you do this to yourself? How can you put yourself in such a situation that has caused you so much distress? Could you not have been better? And over the years, that kind of blaming and shaming in many ways multiplied in different relationships. And there was also, in many cases, a deep sense of guilt for certain things that I might have done. Now, just being able to understand that I was angry, and in certain relationships, it has taken me years to understand that I have been angry actually with myself. In some cases, it took me months. But the moment I could understand that I was angry, and because I have been practicing mindfulness, where we train ourselves to accept things as they are, so I could really accept that anger. So I could really say that it is okay to be angry and just feel that anger, the sensation of that anger, the way it felt in my body at that point in time. Or at times it would go on for days in different kind of permutations and combinations. I also realized that I have a view that has been formed because of my upbringing, my ecosystem, my own take on this entire patriarchy. But I can also make space for another view I may not conform to that view, but there can be space for that view as well. So I could respect that view, I can be tolerant of that view. And that also kind of opened up a different space. So it kind of made me not only tolerant and kinder towards those men, but also towards my own self, because I could really hold those multiple views and just be with them without kind of either judging my view or judging the other view. So it's not
Mhm.
that I'm conforming to the other view, not necessarily, but I'm okay with having that other view as well. And the final dimension has been to look at myself as my own companion, or like Indira said last time, to make myself my own soulmate. I think that sorted out a lot of issues for me, and particularly of anger. What I started doing very consciously and concertedly over years, but definitely I can tell you over the last 1 year or so, is to see how I can generate my own happiness so that I'm not looking outside of myself for happiness, which means that I'm not looking at someone else to make me happy. If they make me happy, fine. If they don't make me happy, it is good. I can make myself happy. I can create that, and that I would say needs a lot of practice, a lot of training, and a lot of self discipline, because it's very easy to get pulled and pushed. But it is again where mindfulness has helped me. And the other thing which Harini referred to is nature has helped me tremendously in that journey. I have found a lot of solace in nature, even within the urban spaces that we live in. So just looking, anticipating when I wake up in the morning, anticipating that there will be sparrows in my balcony makes me rush out and go out and look for those sparrows. There is a kingfisher which often comes near our house. So the moment I hear it, I'm rushing out to see where it is. Just the vast expanse of the sky. In office, as this at this point in time, we are going through a lot of deadlines. So I think it was yesterday, I was just looking out of the window, and the leaves of a tree was fluttering in the soft breeze, and that made me so happy. So I have felt that. And then of course doing certain things for myself which I enjoy, like reading, writing, or whatever, needlework, and so on and so forth. So that also has kind of helped me to work with my anger. So it doesn't anymore kind of, what will I say, trap me in, or make me very incapacitated in that sense of the term, because I'm really not looking at someone else. I have also understood that these various relationships, people who have been involved, with whom I have been involved, they have their limitations, they have their strengths, they have their beauty too. And I've understood that they may not be fulfilling my expectations, and it is fine. I can let go of that expectation. And in that letting go, I am enjoying, and I have felt a tremendous sense of freedom, a huge freedom. As if I was reflecting what we will speak today, and what came to my mind is that song that in guide Wahida Rahman sings, no, aaj fir jeene ka tamanna hai. And she sings it falling in love with Devanand. I sing it falling in love with life.
Wow.
It just feels that way for me. So I think that is all that I would have to share right now.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ananya. Very, very powerful, thoughts in terms of. Uh, I think somewhere to me, what strikes me immediately is this whole aspect of how you relate with all of existence and not just a few individuals here, and probably learn to let go of expectations. Very, very beautiful. And also this whole aspect of looking within myself for my happiness, and not necessarily investing in all these relationships to make me feel happy. Can I make myself feel happy? Wonderful. uh, at this stage there are lots of comments coming up which I would definitely want to take, but what we have planned today is a short uh, session, a short practice session, which Ananya has very kindly agreed to lead us into. It's got to do with the breath, the body, and the mind. I think this is as close as I can get to describing it. But then, rather than just be satisfied with the description of that session, I would invite Ananya now to lead us into it. It'll take a few minutes, and I request all our friends and colleagues who have tuned in to take part in this. Ananya, over to you.
Thank you. So this can be quite fun, now, just to look at ourselves. Um, I would just invite you to be comfortable the way you are. Just be comfortable, whether opening your eyes or closing your eyes, whatever works for you. Just make yourself comfortable. And I'll just invite the bell thrice, just to help us get to this moment. Just watch your breath. Don't do anything with your breath. Just see where it is right now for you. Is it in your nostrils, chest, or your belly? Just be with the breath. Don't change it. Just be with it. Now just take your attention to your body. Just see how it feels, the various sensations in your body. Is your body tight or loose? Just don't do anything, just feel it. Just feel the body. Now just experiment seeing how are you feeling? What kind of feelings you have? Is it a nice feeling, happy feeling? Is it a not so nice feeling? Or is it an okay feeling? Just see how it feels in your mind and just be with that feeling. Don't change it, just be with it. Open your eyes. So that's just a very short practice of 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ananya. I hope we get to do more of this, to steady ourselves and watch what is happening inside. Uh, I have a number of questions that have and comments that have been made. So let me take I try and take most of them, and we will see and throw them back at you, and would love to have your responses. Yeah. So I'm going to start with uh, the comment that Jitendra has made, which I had mentioned briefly again. Uh, he talked about human tendencies being that of responding. Humans tend to respond, and here we are talking about not necessarily responding, but watching. Uh, and a very direct question is, how far is this justifiable in the current professional world? So his question is from the context of the professional world when the targets are chasing you. So here is somebody who's obviously sitting beneath a pile of targets, like many of us are, and he says, I need to respond. And how is it justifiable for me to watch my thoughts? Who wants to take that? There's that present anxiety that is killing me, that is consuming me. I think all of you have
May
referred
I?
to it some way. Yeah, yeah, please, Indira.
So we're not talking about not responding. We're just talking about not reacting, I think. At least that's what I meant. Uh, we're just saying you take some time and don't necessarily react through the lens of anger. So if you take some time and sit with it and see that feeling and see what you need to do in light of those targets, maybe you can respond in a different way, which is more productive perhaps and will help you achieve the target. And just to give an example, earlier I used to work 6 to 7 days a week and I felt I was chasing my tail all the time. Now I have declared recently on my birthday that I will take the Saturday off as well and also the Sunday off. It doesn't mean I will not do anything, because in my profession there are people who call and I don't want to not be available just because it's a Sunday, but 99% I avoid doing anything if it's not required immediately. But immediately, it's surprising how much more productive I've become because I've kept time for myself. I don't feel bogged down with the emotion of helplessness, and I don't feel trapped. I also don't feel taken for granted. In my case, of course, I am actually, I myself was driving myself to work 7 days or 6.5 days. But that's not required, I've realized. And you can work more productively and with much more joy sometimes in a shorter period of space, because you're fully with it at that point in time. So you're not clouded with anger or with helplessness or with this feeling of I'm being pushed into a corner, which is what happens with deadlines. You feel sort of terrified almost and frozen. So instead of that, just liberate yourself, sit with it, feel that you're free of that feeling of being hemmed in, and then come back to it, and probably you can deal with it better. I
Mhm.
don't know whether this is too theoretical. I hope it's helped.
It
This is
is
how I deal with it. I
not
don't know whether
theoretical,
anyone
I guess,
else wants
because
to
you've done
respond.
it. It's made a difference to you. Uh, yeah, we will go on. There are other questions that are coming up, and there's a comment from Dharmendra that has come earlier on when you were all talking, and I'll just read this out, and you can pick, your response. If we are not assertive enough but are very helpful, for example, then we are likely to end up self-sacrificing. How do you see this? I mean, what could it mean from the point of view of, I mean, he's obviously, I think, talking from the in the context of this discussion on anger. And then he says that if we are quiet, not assertive enough, but are seen as being very helpful, then will we not end up self-sacrificing? Will not some part of our uh, needs or dignity or interests be compromised? That's the question. Anyone wants to say anything about that?
Maybe I'll go
Yep.
for it.
Yeah.
Let me give
Yeah,
it a
Nanya.
try. Yeah, I feel that as you become aware of the anger, if that's an emotion, and as you sit with it, the first thing which happens is that you actually generate a lot of self compassion because you become much more kinder to yourself. I think half the battle is won when you acknowledge anger, or for that matter, any emotion. So you are not cutting it off in a way.
Mm-hmm.
The second is that it doesn't mean that you should not be assertive. What it means is that you are not reacting to it. You can be assertive. At least I can talk about myself. I have possibly become more assertive over time because I have understood what my needs are, and I'm no longer ready to possibly compromise on those needs because I
Mm-hmm.
value them a lot. I understand
Right.
them from a deep space, and I will
Mm-hmm.
not compromise, which I would have done earlier on when I had my own views or sticking to my views and so on and so forth. But now that I understand them well, I will
Mm-hmm.
possibly be able to put it forth in a way in which I make a point, but I'm not being. I won't. I mean, the way I will speak to the other person is not of blaming him or her, that you have done this to me, or how could you, do this, or you are like that, you are like this. Possibly, I will say that your action has hurt me a lot. So there is a difference in the way I would be putting it because I believe in that. It's not because of a theoretical brain exercise. I really believe that it is not about a person. It's about, as I have said earlier on, how he or she has been brought up. So many things make up a person. So if a
Mm-hmm.
person has a certain standpoint, it is because of the conditions in which he or she is right now. So
Mm-hmm.
that makes it easier to shift it for me and to say that I will, you know, yes, I feel hurt and I have done that. I would also, like Indira said, would sulk earlier on, but I don't no longer sulk. I would go back to that person when I feel I'm sufficiently calmed and tell him or her that this, what you said, or these words that you used, it has really hurt me, or I felt angry. So I feel that that way you put across your point, but you are not kind of being judgmental of that person, or neither are you being judgmental of yourself. So
Hmm.
that's all that I would have to say.
Yep, yep. Thank you very much, Ananya. I think the point about not reacting, but uh, sitting with it for a little, and then probably responding from another place, and not reacting immediately and feel justified in doing that. Priyanka talked about, I mean, her question that she asked earlier was, what does taking care of yourself mean? I think uh, each one of you has mentioned it in different ways. What does it mean watching your thoughts or analyzing what you want? Is that what taking care of yourself means? I mean, is that the first step, literally?
Okay, I guess I should take this since
Yep,
I haven't been
absolutely.
taking any questions. I think taking care of myself means to me to pause to see what I need at any time.
Hmm.
Uh, that's it. It isn't this or that.
Okay.
Uh, I think um, I think we, as we practice mindfulness, or maybe even other contemplative or spiritual practices, we recognize how much we are constantly being driven by a certain habitual pattern
Hmm.
in whatever we do. Even if I'm just sitting,
Hmm.
uh, I'm now taking the phone and I'm reading or whatever. Um, and we think that that's how we are. And we are very defined by that sense of this is who I am. And
Hmm.
this is how it is. And this is how the world should be or world is. And this is how she is or who. I think taking care really just means pausing to let the mind still. And that's, I think, a lot of what the formal practices are about. The training of getting the mind to a place where it is still enough to see things
Hmm.
for what they are. And until we are not so still, it's difficult to really get in touch with what is needed. So for me, I think taking care really means um, taking time to still myself and really sense what is needed. And sometimes what is
Hmm.
really just needed is to still myself and
Hmm.
nothing else.
So it is
Because
both the
our
means as well as the end, in a sense.
to me, yes, because we experience a lot of distress just by being in this thing of mode of reacting and being in a charge, even if it's a positive charge, like I'm doing something great, I'm just going and helping people, but I'm going, I need to help, I need to help, I need to help, and I'm just kind of helping. That's a lot of charge. So really just allowing things to still and then seeing what is needed. And sometimes then nothing is needed, sometimes maybe something is needed. It really depends. um,
Hmm.
and for example, Pema really says about anger that the actual emotion of anger is only 90 seconds and it is going to end at the end of 1.5 minutes. Everything that continues after those 90 minutes is what we have done to rekindle it. There is
Hmm.
neuroscience backing this fact, right? So
Hmm.
the system is going to
Fascinating.
be in
Yeah.
that emotion for 90 seconds. Now, but I am in my habitual thing. No, no, but yes, this, that, falana. So now I'm just saying, okay, can I just step back from this, pause, watch what is going on? Because the watching brings the cortical brain into action, and um, and the whole hijack that we experience by
Hmm.
the subcortical brain, where we are just in that moment of reacting, has a chance to sort of taper down. So our brain also comes into a more integrated state. And when that happens, the whole state changes, right? Um, But to be able to see all that, we need practice, we need training, because it's very difficult to still the mind and not let those 90 seconds become 190 seconds. So yeah, I
Yeah,
think really just that.
this is fascinating. This study or this evidence that comes from watching what happens inside the brain. I think this is really fantastic, and I really like the way you use the word hijack. I think we really get hijacked into reacting, and possibly, this pause to me. I want to tell each one of you is turning out to be the most precious and valuable thing that we can probably do as human beings. It helps us in so many different ways, as each one of you has pointed out. I just want to read a comment that Smita Bharti has made sometime in the beginning of this conversation, and she had said, I believe anger to be a very positive and strong emotion. I think this is something that Harini and Ananya also mentioned. Anger with mindfulness can move mountains. In the absence of mindfulness, it can be a destructive force. And I think we only have our own lives to see. And Milan Vyas also talks about anger through tears. Watching our thoughts and being compassionate for ourselves through the anger makes a positive difference in our lives. So let me go on a little more. Uh, my friend Dharmendra from Jaipur has this question to ask, quite different from the topic. In a sense related to it, but then here it comes. He says, to some, the external instrument like this bowl, the Buddha bowl, helps. But isn't this a temporary and materialistic input? That's the first question. The second question, and he brings in a completely different angle over here. Not sure if we'll have the time to look at it, but then I'm going to ask this question. He says, lasting peace and bliss can only be attained by awakened Kundalini. Rest is just a try. So, any thoughts on this? What we want to say to Dharmendra on these two questions or comments that he has made?
Um,
Yeah, Harini.
yeah, I don't know what can cause lasting peace and bliss because I haven't attained it. So um, I think there are many approaches to all of this, and only those people who have attained something can really say what works, what doesn't work. Um, in my own family, my husband, they have a very different approach, and uh, I think there are. What I do understand is that um, nature or the supreme power or God or whatever we call it must have figured out various ways for various people to achieve whatever they are meant to achieve, because this world is, I always argue with my husband, there's this whole uh, there's a spiritual community that he's a part of, which I honor a lot. And I keep telling him, but this is only in this part of the world. How does Africa achieve salvation? If because in this community we are saying, yeah, only this is the way, then somewhere I'm sure Africans can also achieve
I'm sure.
salvation. So it's a
Yeah,
question I stay away from. I don't
right.
know. I haven't arrived. I don't know if there is anything like that. What I do know is that in my life, with
Hmm.
what I'm doing, there is a sense of greater harmony.
Right,
Um, and that's all I'm looking for right now.
right,
And,
right.
and there's respect for everything else that is there, and there's a time for everything else that is there.
Sure. I think very well put, in fact. Also speaks to the diversity of things, human possibilities, almost endless human possibilities that are available uh, for what we sometimes call as salvation or whatever. I mean, I don't even know whether that's the right word. Greater harmony, perhaps. That's closer to it. Triveni has a question to Indira. specifically. So she asks, Martin Luther King believed that during protests, if someone hurts you, you shouldn't respond at all. Somewhat like a Gandhian position. And her question is it right to not retaliate, especially when targeted by oppressors?
Uh, I'm still working with this because I work for the oppressed, what I feel are the oppressed, and they feel they are
Hmm.
oppressed as well. These are the urban poor. There are laws in their favor, but on the ground they're seldom implemented. They're harassed and extorted from by the police. So I'm working with that. Now, should one react, for example, during a protest, even if it's a peaceful protest, and if, say, the police comes and beats you up, do you react? So, do you want to react to that? Or do we then lose the plot if we react to that and shift the focus away from the real issue? This is something that I've been asking myself. So is it better then to then not react then, but step back, take up that issue in question, which is why the police or that particular oppressor targeted protesters, and try to deal with that later. This is something that I've been looking at, because I find very often, when they show these visuals of lathi charges, etc., it just becomes something that does not get resolved at that time. If you're fighting back, then there is a greater lathi charge, and it goes on and on. Now, I'm not saying you sit and take it, but perhaps withdraw and come back and talk about uh, the system which actually encourages an authority to apply force and violence when there is actually peace to articulate something that is a need. So, be it a Shaheen Bagh situation where you're talking about a law that tries to polarize people based on religion, in my view, it may not be everyone's view. Uh, but then, if you have people sitting in protest, do you actually go and beat them up, or do you try to have a dialogue? So I've been thinking a lot about these things and discussing it with friends as well. And I feel that instead of going and shouting about it and falling into the trap that is in a way being laid by people who perhaps have not been practicing, maybe we can create a space for a dialogue to then try to work together towards greater peace and harmony. That's my view on the matter.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Uh, Indu has made this comment that, and I'm quoting now, what I think is everyone feels the need to express anger, but due to various reasons, a lot of people cannot express their anger, and this makes a lot of people depressed and lose their confidence. So I think, does anybody want to say anything to this? I mean, it's not a question, it's a comment, but I think it kind of connects to what each one of you have talked, especially in terms of looking at yourself. I mean, she talks about loss of confidence, she talks of slipping into depression because you're not able to express yourself. Yeah. Ananya, would you want to respond to that?
Mm, I think that when we have this emotion, at that point in time, many of us actually cannot respond or react. Like if that's what you're meaning, because we all have different ways of responding and reacting, right? Like I can talk about myself. When I was young, my mother, out of her fear and anxiety, would get into a fit of rage and would slap me or beat me up. And it immediately kind of, makes me get into a sense of freeze, uh, in a way. But I have practiced with it, and then what I feel is that, um, you what one can do is, when you look deeply, and it actually needs a little bit of a training in the sense that to be with the moment and to have certain kind of practices to which we spoke yet last time as well, that just to be in the present moment. So as you start being there, you realize that from where that anger is arising in you, and why does it
Hmm.
incapacitate you to say something. Maybe because you feel that what you have to say will not be heard, and so many narratives come to our mind, right? So once we kind of get to understand what is that narrative for us, then what happens is, uh, we can really respond back. It takes us time, but we learn as to how to respond back, and tell that person that, uh, this is not the way I want this thing, or this is not what I have written. So the bottom line is basically to familiarize yourself with yourself. That I think is most important. And as you do that, you can see from where you come. I don't know if
Right.
this really responds to her question, but in this short time, this is what I can say, and others can add if they wish to, Indira and Harini.
I'd
That's a very
like to add
useful
a
response, Ananya. Thank you. Yeah, Indira, please.
like to add a little something here, which is, do we want to respond with anger or do we want to respond with our need? So that is where the practice and the skill lies, and you're creating a space between your expression. So the expression of anger could be sulking or shouting, but your expression of your need could be, look, I really want this. So in the case of the protest, that I really want you to hear me about this law, or in
Hmm.
the case of a personal need, like you never listened to me or you did something which I did not expect, maybe say it at another time and say, oh, actually I needed this, and perhaps I would have liked it if you did it this way. Maybe you will get greater receptivity also. You're skilling yourself, and there is that pause which gives everybody a breather. I also want to say that we are also afraid very often to express ourselves in anger. This thought also came to me because we are scared that we will express ourselves incorrectly or angrily, and that will create more problems. So in sometimes we also get into that freeze mode because of that, perhaps. So maybe that is also a reason why we are not able to express ourselves in that moment. Thanks.
Hmm. I think this also relates both to what you and Ananya and Harini earlier have said. It also addresses to some extent the question that, or the comment that Komal has made, which is I mostly throw my anger on my dear ones and cannot or could not stop it even if I want to. How can mindfulness help me out to overcome my anger? I mean, we have delved on this in different ways through this session. So I hope, Komal, you have got some insights from all this sharing. Um, and lastly, Jitendra talks about, I mean, he thanks Harini for this 90-second emotion time. He says it's really good to know this. And he also shares a very interesting tidbit. I can relate. Uh, he says, I can relate Love Movie Lesson by Amjad Khan to an angry Salman Khan as to do counting for 90 seconds before reacting it in anger. So obviously somebody has made use of that wonderful insight from brain research in a Salman Khan and Amjad Khan movie. So that's nice. Yeah. So I think that's about what we have for today. Thank you so much for all these insightful comments and questions. I have also left a question for all our friends, asking them what they want us to look at perhaps in the next session. And I also want to say that the next Mindful Saturday session is going to be on the 5th of November. So we are doing it once in every 2 weeks. I'll come to you, Harini. 5th of November at 11 a.m.
So December.
So please, sorry, 5th of December. Yes,
December.
thank you. Thank you for correcting me. We are going back in time otherwise. So please come and join us on 5th of December. Uh, Thank you once again, Ananya, Harini, and Indira. And yes, Harini, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I just saw a question, and it makes me want to say something, if that's okay.
Please.
I'll not take
Yeah,
long.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Milan has a
Def-
question. There are lots of techniques for mind control
Oh,
available
yes.
along with
Yes,
various
yes.
meditation methods as well. But when you're in anger or stress, then how can you focus in meditation? Uh, so couple of things
Very,
that come to my
yeah.
mind.
Mm,
Um, I would feel rather sad if at the end of our conversation we conveyed the impression that we should not be angry,
mm,
uh, because anger is a human response to pain, to disappointment, to frustration, to a sense of lack, which, as the Buddha said, we are wired to experience. The brain has a negativity bias. We are structurally like that, and we
mhm,
will have to put in work to transform that negativity bias to a adequacy bias or whatever we call it. Um, so we are not really talking about controlling anger so that we can stop it.
mm,
We are, I think, we are talking about learning or training to cultivate a capacity to watch our anger, or for
mm,
that matter, any emotion, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. Um, and the idea is that this emotion is naturally going to pass because it is transient in nature.
mm,
And if we can have the capacity to step back, watch that particular flood move off, then we will be able to see something more clearly
mm,
in that moment, which could be, for example, what Indira said: what is it that I need? What is this in reaction to?
mm,
And we may have a more constructive response to a situation. So, in meditation, for example, if there is anger, in mindfulness, they train you to watch the anger. So, it's not then doing something else, but to actually witness the anger as you experience it in the body, as you experience it in form of thoughts, or experience it in terms of a feeling. Um, so, in mindfulness, we're not really saying don't be angry. We are saying if there is anger, accept that in this moment there is anger, and I'm going to watch it just as I would watch my breath,
mm,
as an object of my attention and my curiosity, to really look at its nature. So we are not shunning anything, and we are not saying now, therefore, everyone who's mindful should always look peaceful and settled and have a halo behind. Nothing like that. We are
even if it
basically,
means great suppression.
yeah, we're really saying, so if there is depression, we are talking about watching the depression. Of course, I would like to caveat that by saying that a lot, there is enough and more of scientific uh, plea by professionals that there are clinical conditions that cannot get addressed through mindfulness training. They need therapy. So I'm not really talking about deep psychological difficulties, but if I'm feeling low and sad, I can watch that. If I'm feeling low angry, I can watch that. If I'm feeling neutral, I can watch that. If I'm feeling happy, I can watch that. That's basically the idea, and nothing is shunned in the approach, at least that I am exposed to. Indira and Ananya might, I think, have a view on this as well. Nothing is shunned. Everything can be seen as something that is in the here and now, and we watch it and we look at its nature. Then, as we look at its nature, we discover a state which is probably more receptive to this moment itself,
Mm,
which is freer from our reaction, relatively freer from our reactions, and therefore
right.
has a more spacious um, um, sort of possibility to it.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
I
So
think
I don't
that's
know
a
if it
very, yeah.
addresses Milan's question directly, but I would really request everyone to to take advantage of the training, because this conversation is not the training. This
Yes,
conversation is just a hope to trigger interest. The training
yes,
is happening elsewhere
different.
by
Yeah,
experts.
yes, yes. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Harini, for that very important clarification. I think we are here not talking of controlling. We are here not talking of suppressing. We are talking definitely of watching. And in that act of watching, a lot of other things can happen, a lot of other possibilities, probably more enabling possibilities, you know, come up, which can only be felt through experience. And of course, these sessions are not meant to be training sessions. They're only meant to be sessions that can possibly make us pause, reflect, and move in that direction. Again, thank you everyone for this wonderful second Mindful Saturday session. Look forward to the third on the 5th of December. Once again, thanks Indira, Ananya, and Harini for your time. And thank you to all my friends, our friends, and colleagues who have joined. It was indeed a very insightful session, made even more insightful by the kind of questions and comments that were made. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye bye.
Thank
Thank you. Thank you.
How do I end this?